We've got Jan Wildbore Irwin from Devon, she's an advisory teacher, and Abigail Cole, who's a trainee EP, and of course Sonia from the social inclusion team. I'm just going to hand over to Jan first, please, just to say a little bit about your background.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Very great pleasure of mine to be here this afternoon. I will know some of you, but not all. I'm an advisory teacher for social and emotional mental health, have been for about 16 years. I was previously a SENCO and a primary school teacher, mostly in Key Stage 2, but I did do Key Stage 1 as well. In recent years, I've sort of branched out into lots of different things. I've been doing my master's, which is in psychology and neuroscience of mental health, which I found fascinating and really helpful for the work that I do. And for the last 7 years, I've had a lead on domestic abuse and violence and child parent and adolescent parent violence. So that's where I'm coming from.
And Abby?
Hi, I'm really excited to be here. I'm Abby. I'm a trainee EP. I have an interest in language and how language can affect SEMH needs. Before training as an EP, I've worked as a primary school teacher too in different schools across Devon, Birmingham, Dorset. I've had lots of different roles in those kind of schools, but yeah, that's my background.
Lovely, thank you. And Sonia?
Hiya, so you will know me. I'm Sonia. I'm a social inclusion officer. My background is social work, so I've been qualified for over 15 years, and I've worked alongside children and families throughout that time in various different agencies, local authority, health and education, to support them to get the right service at the right time. And I'm a strong believer in the contextual picture for children, that holistic picture, and kind of getting all the bits of the jigsaw puzzle together really is kind of where I'm coming from.
Lovely, fantastic, thank you. Right, so we're going to start off with probably the most important question, is what is regulation in its broadest sense? So we're going to start off with Jan and listen to really create a picture around what regulation is and what it isn't.
Okay. All right, well, I'm just going to jump straight in there. I know that many of you, if not all of you, will know quite a lot actually about it. But if we just go right back to sort of the beginning and build up, I think that might be useful. So when I talk about regulation or think about regulation, I think of it as a state of balance, if you like. It's a state of balance within our body where we're able to manage our emotions, that we are regulated. When we are born as little babies, obviously, we are born with a very limited capacity to regulate or to be regulated. That's something that develops over time, and it develops in relationship. So the more experiences when we are small and young that we have of somebody else regulating us, so picking us up, calming us, soothing us, meeting our needs, responding to us, and keeping us safe, predominantly, these experiences early on lead our brains to be wired in a certain way, without going off in too much of that direction. But basically, those experiences help us to develop a capacity to regulate. As we get a little bit older, or a little bit bigger, maybe sort of toddler size, and we start to explore the world, and we start to be mobilized and develop a bit more language, we become more able to regulate ourselves in other ways, and we become more socially aware. And so we can regulate ourselves by looking for adults. We are naturally inclined to look for adults to meet our needs and to calm us down and to respond to us when we're distressed or scared. And that builds into our capacity to be regulated and to experience regulation. And later on again, as we develop, usually before, 3, 4, 5 years of age, ideally, we might even get to a point of cognitive regulation where we can begin to sort of think about cause and effect. We might reflect on how we feel when we can't have something we want and we're very disappointed. So we might begin to have the early stages of a capacity for cognitive regulation. So there are these sort of stages of regulation that we develop over time. For me, I think it's so important for us to recognise the role we have in school for young people who will have had perhaps a lack of availability of parent to support them through their regulation stages. We are there to pick up on those gaps, if you like, and support them to sort of know that they're safe and special, all the things I mentioned earlier on, but you know, with a very small baby. I think as well, it's quite clear that, you know, children who have had perhaps developmental trauma, neglect, and early experiences where they've been unsafe are going to find it really difficult to be in relationship with us, and for us to be able to then be there to regulate them. They may well reject our efforts to be able to regulate them, and that can sometimes feel like we are very frustrated by that and can't get through. And I would say to that it's in the face of a child's dysregulation that if we can hold our regulation, so if I can stay calm when you are not calm, the way I think of it as a child, an adult to a child, I am actually modeling for you your ability, you know, I'm modeling the experience of being able to manage my emotional state. So it's really important for us to understand, and I can see from the questions you've put in today that some of you are talking about, well, how do I manage this emotional state in this person or myself or other children, and it's linking that all together is recognizing that when we are regulated ourselves, we are doing the best job we possibly can for children because we're modeling how to be regulated. I hope that makes sense.
Lovely, Jan. Thank you very much. And it's really interesting, the language that you chosen there, to be in relationship with us, is you know, the subtleties of the language and the way that we communicate our needs is really important in this area. Abby, is there anything else that you'd want to add?
Yeah, within psychology, some psychologists call that the dance of attunement, and that's particularly so when you're a baby, you attune to someone else, and mothers or fathers, whoever parents, can do this by singing, matching the child, but we attune with people all the time. That doesn't stop once you've been a baby. Children are always looking for attunement and are looking for people to be on their level to meet their needs. And yeah, Jan's right, it's all about connecting, and that's definitely one way to connect is through attunement.
Lovely. So like Jan's alluded to, we do have a few questions to follow.
Can I just pop in?
Oh,
I'm going to break with the pattern briefly, just because it was just something that Abby said about connection there, and it's that's so key, and it's that what we do know about connection and interaction when we're in a safe relationship is that stimulates some really feel-good hormones in our brains, and that makes us calm down. So that's another good reason why we'd be wanting to be really, really aware of regulation. Sorry.
That's right. It's quite right. You have to speak longer though while I finish writing down all these good words that you keep saying. So yeah, so at Alumnus, we have a character development policy to give us our structure and really to guide us how our expectations around learners and people. So the question is, what do schools need to also consider in order to ensure that children are regulated and can learn effectively? So I guess this is a two-layered question on top of a behaviour policy or a character expectation policy. What further thinking do we need to get ourselves into in order to meet that need?
Can I jump in on this one?
Please do.
The thing that springs to mind is that the character policy sounds great, and it's important that those kind of skills are taught every single day. So it's not just I've got a child with SEMH needs or regulation needs, I'm going to do this one-off intervention once a week and then they're going to be fine. It's everyday little interactions that really make the difference, and building upon, okay, what are the characteristics that we want to see, what are our values at this school, and how can I model those types of behaviours every day and reinforce that slowly, drip feed through every interaction that I have, and not think of it as like one discrete thing I need to do and then I can tick that off for that child. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting now, because that is, you know, our character development policy is very much about the adults in our schools modelling and seeing every interaction with a child as an opportunity to make them feel valued and seen and heard. So we very much do try to have that kind of ethos in our schools, so that we are modelling our own regulation and our own character to them.
And I think, to add to that, the way we might ensure that children are regulated before we think about the other thing, you know, is our level of awareness around what safety cues and messages we are giving out. There is something called neuroception, which you may have heard about. If not, I would look it up. I would listen to some podcasts or YouTubes about it. It's very interesting. And we all have the ability to pick up what's going on around us and know mainly around, and neuroception is mainly focused on how safe we are. And so I can tell what's going on behind me, or I can hear something from over there, and I can see and read some expressions on some faces that might make me think, I'm not sure I'm safe, or I'm not sure that person's happy at the moment. I'll be picking up that kind of information, as we all will, to know whether or not we're safe. That's neuroception. Children who've had early developmental trauma and difficult experiences early on, or may have communication issues and difficulty understanding and reading situations, are going to be particularly hypersensitive or hypervigilant to those safety cues and need those safety cues from us. And the safety cues, you know, there are obvious ones, aren't there, that, you know, it's that we need to be congruent, where our facial expressions and our body language needs to match. So we can't be going, yes, I love having you in my class, when there is this distinct impact that the child's going to be reading that you're not really very happy at the moment. So we need to be really calm, again, I say ourselves, so that we're really ready and open to be in relationship with these children, and that we are sending signals that we're safe. And that might be that I think that we turn the language up on safety anyway. And I've seen this make a big difference to lots of children, where sometimes an adult might just show I'm in charge of the safety by saying things like, oh, I'm just going to move that. I don't think that's safe there. I'll just look after that. Or, oh, do you think that's safe? No, I'm not sure either. Let's do it like this. And just the adult taking the responsibility for the child's safety and letting them know that we're looking after that over time, that can help a child to feel more relaxed with us and less hypervigilant and less sensitive to reading. But it's obvious things like our body language, our tone of voice, you know, the pace at which we speak, how warm we are, whether or not we use a relational approach or whether or not we're a bit more, you know, we might be able to say that these two examples, these sentences together, we might say, we want somebody to stop doing something. And we might say, you need to stop doing that now. Or we could say, I'm guessing you're not sure what to do next. And we can give the opportunity to the child to experience us as a very safe adult, and we still get the same outcome, but they are calmer.
And
And
to add to
that
that,
sort
Jan,
of,
oh,
sorry,
sorry.
that sort of language, Jan, that wondering out loud
Yeah,
language
absolutely.
is a skill to practice, isn't it? Because there's a definite skill in choosing the right words and putting the emphasis in the right place and making sure that the safety cues are there, but
Yep.
at the same time, you know, for the older children, not being patronizing and
Yeah,
and all
you're
of that.
right. Yeah, we definitely need to practice it. And one of the little mnemonics that I use quite a lot with school staff and parents is WIN, W-I-N, which is wonder, imagine, notice. So you play around with, they don't have to be in that order. So I'm imagining that this is feeling quite tricky for you at the moment. I've noticed sometimes when this, you know, when we start doing reading activities, you start moving around the class quite a lot. And I'm wondering if it's because you find this really hard and you're finding that it's hard to do this activity. So, you know, it's not, come on, you're supposed to be, it's a way of engaging with the young person that's very safe for them, while we're also showing concern and interest. And we don't have to spend hours, you know, thinking, oh, I've got to do an intervention. No, it's just an interaction with the child that is around using language very safely for the child. I'm wondering, I'm imagining, I'm noticing.
to add on to the safety cues, when I go and work with young people, sometimes there's a mismatch between what they understand is happening in terms of safety cues compared to what is. So I'll observe a lesson and the teacher doing everything great, and I'll speak to a young person and they'll say, the teacher shouts at me, the teacher gets really close to me, and that's often if they've experienced trauma, they misread safety cues. So sometimes if you're thinking, I don't know what this trigger is for this child, I can't figure it out, it could be that they're misinterpreting a safety cue and you think, I'm not shouting at them, but they're misunderstanding that, and it's really important to try and hear their voice and see how they're finding the situation.
Lovely, thanks, Abby, because that takes us quite nicely into the sort of the next area that we've got, which is from a behaviour policy, from the character development policy. Then children who have difficulty and need a plan in order for us to think about how we meet the needs. So a bit more of a considered thought around the developmental needs that child has. We use the word trigger to really to say what has kicked off this behaviour that the child's exhibiting, and we get quite hung up on the behaviour that's exhibited because that is the real thing that's happening in the classroom or in the school at the time. So in order to create this plan to give the structured support, what do you think are necessary elements, necessary thinking that we need to put into a character plan or a behaviour plan in order to make sure that we think about as much as we can to keep that level of to keep that level down so that the child can work inside the environment?
I think one of the things that is really fundamental about triggers and understanding what is that very commonly over the years, now that we use the word commonly, don't we use triggered, being triggered, very normally it's normalized in schools, but actually when you're really thinking about what's going on is very important for us to understand the bigger picture, and also to think about, like you say, apply some thinking to it. And for me, one of the most important things I learned about triggers, was when I was doing some work with some psychologists who talked to me about sense and event memories. And I found that just so amazing that, we have sense memories and we have event memories, and our sense memories are pre-language usually. And so she likened it for me to sort of like, if you are sort of touching something or hearing something or smelling something, you get a reaction, you think, oh, I don't know why I don't like that, or I don't know why I really like that. And our sense memories laid down pre-language will always be with us to some extent. And then we'll have event memories, and I can remember certain things that might trigger me if it's a bit like that event memory. But for those sense memories, I won't know, I won't have a clue, and I won't actually have language to wrap around that either. And so I think spending a lot of time trying to work out what the triggers are can be a bit of not a red herring, but it can be something that we really don't need to focus so much on. I think when we want a young person to explain why something happened, I think, that's another area where there's an expectation that they will know, but I don't think they do. Or they may have learnt to tell us what they think we're going to want to hear, or what's the right thing to say in this situation, and that really doesn't progress things very much. So for me, for thinking about triggers and understanding what triggers are, we recognize that they happen. We recognize that a trigger, when I hear somebody perhaps say there was no trigger at all, everything was fine. Actually, we don't know that, and we can't say that. There will have been a trigger because the brain won't have triggered the release of stress hormones and adrenaline across the body for to cut off that, to make them ready to fight, flight, freeze, or flop. It won't have done that for no reason at all. It might be sort of trigger happy. Happy might be the wrong word, but it might be very responsive because it's had a lot of being triggered, and so that may be real or a perceived threat, like Abby was saying. It doesn't have to be real. The brain extrapolates to situations that was a bit like an experience that I felt very uncomfortable, unsafe in, and therefore I'm going to feel anxiety around that. I'm going to be stressed by that. I'm going to trigger. So I think it's important for us to understand what triggers are, but not always so important to sort of really try and find out exactly what the trigger is, because we may not be able to know that.
So that's really interesting, because one of the things as a decades ago teacher, you found quite reassuring that you could identify some triggers so you could avoid things in the classroom. And
yeah, I think if that's
it's
fairly obvious and clear, yes. But I think that it more broadly, children may not know, and we may be kind of just attaching some logic or some reasoning or some meaning to some of their emotional experiences that might not actually be what's going on.
so in terms of the plan to go forward, Abby, and as you're creating a plan, we're also thinking about the evidence that we're gathering in order to potentially get some extra support for the child that might not be in the school at the moment. With that piece of advice in and around the triggers, how do we pull this information together and concrete our thinking to support, but at the same time, look for that additional external support?
I think sometimes it can seem obvious, but it always comes back to the plan, do and review. And obviously there's a graduated response that Devon offer. I know you've got your character development plan, but another really great document that's free that from Devon is the relational policy and support plans, and you can draw bits out of there when you're designing a plan. But what I would say is don't be afraid to get things wrong and have to do things again. Like building a review, building time that it might not work, or if it works now, it might not work in the next half term. That can be really hard to come back from that, I think, when you think, oh, I've cracked this now, like I've got this right for this child, and then you have to change things again. That's okay. It's okay to just try something new, speak to other people in your school, draw like you between you in this meeting now. There's so much expertise. There's a lot of people to draw upon. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. So before we go, there's a definite two halves to the questions. Before we go into the second half of thinking a little bit more deeply inside of some of the things that you've said, one of the you might be able to answer this, Sonia, a little bit better than our experts in the panel, because they've not been inside our schools very much. But one of the questions that was asked was, how would you approach a colleague if you felt the language they were using wasn't in line with our character development policies and was in fact, in their opinion, triggering children?
That's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because again, as colleagues, we all exist in relationships, don't we? And people have bad days. We're all humans. We have buttons that are pushed. But I guess that's about, knowing our colleagues and being quite sensitive to actually what has gone on for you that day, starting with the empathetic approach. What's gone on for you that day, because it's not like you to use that kind of language with a child. So I'm just wondering, again, I'd use the wonder, imagine, notice. I would use the same strategies for a colleague as I would with a child, because we show them the exact same respect. We still all have the same regulation challenges at times, don't we? When we've had a really busy morning, a really challenging day. So yeah, I would be very empathetic and very understanding and supportive to try and help them get to a place where they feel able to use that character language and to be really embracing the positivity with our children.
Lovely, thanks, Sonia. I don't know, Jan, have you come across in your realms of experience adults and the complexities?
Yeah, I do, and I agree with what Sonia said. Basically, I think we do need to use some of the skills that we use with children. We do need to use those interpersonal, interrelational skills, if you like, that are around, non-judgment and, and supportive, and recognizing that it's not easy. Classrooms and schools are very stressful places to work. And we know that young people are exhibiting a very high level of need post-COVID, even higher than before. And people care very much about these children and care very much about the work that they're doing. So it's deeply emotionally charged. And so when we respond empathically, like Sonia is suggesting, we can reassure and help adult and staff and people who are working in settings that, you know, they are listened to, they are valued, they are important. And, you know, we have off days, and certainly there are children, you know, like, knowing our own hooks and triggers, if you like, is a very, very important self-awareness that somebody who works with children, particularly children who have difficulties, needs. And so reflecting that back to them about that, what a strength it is in actual fact that they have an awareness, you know, is a positive place to go with them, you know, and I think it is about building really good relationships with all staff.
Absolutely. They're one of the key takeouts from some passive intervention support training that I had in the past was that, you know, to be able to tap somebody on the shoulder, give them a code word if you like, but they would know then that you're there to take over, and you know they're not to really argue that point. It's just it's a tag out, and you know it's time for a cup of tea, or
it's a professional strength, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that again, that honest and openness inside the working environment is really something which we have to work on, don't we? Okay, so we went through quite a lot of questions, and we've cherry picked a few. If anybody in the audience wants to put anything to the chat, like I said, we can sort of deviate in and around. The panel really, I was going to say liked the question, but you know the question stood out of how can you tell when a child is misbehaving through choice or an educational need? When should sanctions be given, and what sanctions should be given? So a chuckle there, Jan. I probably guess where this one's going. You want to start? Or Abby, do you want to?
I don't mind. Abby, do you want to go first?
Go, Abby. You go first, Abby.
The thing that stood out to me in this one is it can be easier to empathize with a child when they kind of what we might describe as seeing red. You know, they've lost control, they've done this, and I can empathize with that because they're not in control. But it's important to remember that you can still make choices when you are dysregulated. So if you think of a time you felt really upset, you've made a bad choice, but then you regret it, like you made a bad choice, but it came from a dysregulated state. And it can be quite hard to empathize sometimes, I think, with those children, because they're not actively choosing to be bad or do a bad thing. It's still coming from a place of dysregulation, and that can be tricky to manage. And with sanctions, for me, I try to think more about boundaries. So if a child's done something, they need a boundary, like they've hurt another child and they might need to miss playtime. It's not you're in trouble, here's your punishment, you're missing playtime. It's I need to keep you safe as your teacher, and I need to keep everybody else safe. I'm going to talk about what happened yesterday because it seems like that was really hard for you and I don't want to end up in this situation again. How can I help you? So it's kind of the same consequence, but it's how you frame it and how you manage that time, I think, is a useful way to look at it.
I think that's brilliant. I agree with that. I tend to think of it in terms very similarly to Abby, but I think of it in terms of defensive and discharge behaviours. And discharge behaviours are the ones that Abby was just describing there. When somebody's seeing red, it's a massive discharge out of the body, and we know what that feels like. I think a lot of us can empathise. At some points in our lives, we may have lost it once or twice, and felt rather, you know, out of control in that moment. And so we have an immediate recognition of that, go, whoa, I know that is when you really don't feel in control, and we recognize that. And so when children grow up with their discharge behaviors not being met, and it's a very important part of the development early on, that when a child and a baby's screaming and discharging, you know, and somebody calms and soothes and holds that child and regulates that child and provides safety and care and love, even in the face of that awful discharge, they are loved. When that is not enough, when that has not happened sufficiently, and this isn't to blame parents, and parents are unavailable for a lot of different reasons, as we know, but when that hasn't happened enough for the young person, sometimes they then go on to develop further types of responses, which we might think of as defensive responsive. And defensive responses are sort of learned strategies, if you like, to remain safe. And they're like lying, cheating, setting others up to fight, being a bit manipulative and controlling. That's the way we look at those, because we don't like those. And it's, we really don't like those behaviours. And that's quite an effective strategy that the child has learned to make themselves separate from us, and we can't really touch them. And that's a defensive approach. So that discharge behaviour, when it's not been met, can lead the child to develop these strategies. And then we look at those strategies and think, oh, well, they're just choosing to be like that. And it's quite easy to sort of see that to use words like they're being manipulative and controlling, they actively choose. I don't believe, I have to say, that choice comes into it. There may be times, I'm not saying, children, let's say, who haven't had a developmental interruption, who haven't been traumatized early, who aren't on the spectrum, who don't have ADHD, have no other, let's say that the few that are out there that have never had any ACEs or any impacts on their worlds, who might occasionally, for the fun of it, misbehave, whatever that is, and or flout some of our expectations, are really experimenting with being a little person. And and it's the boundaries that we set. It's the fair and reasonable boundaries that we set and support them to reach. That means that they experience a lot of positive and worthwhile engaging with us kinds of situations. If it's not worthwhile and we are shaming them and we are unhappy with them and we reject them, they will become defensive.
Lovely, thank you. So that brings us into a question that somebody asked, which changed the way I thought about this sort of scenario. So it was around about children who aren't regulating, and quite often the first response of that child is to leave that environment, leave that setting, because that's an environment which is triggering them. They know that, so therefore their defensive move is to extract themselves from that situation. In a classroom, that obviously presents itself as quite an unsafe action. So although the child is seeking safety, the teacher perceives that as being an unsafe action. There might be all sorts of elements involved in that, like supervision, which might come into it. How do we deal with that sort of situation? It's not a good place to pause there, is it, Jan? But it's
I wasn't sure.
yeah, it's a question which a lot of teachers will either have or experience on a consistent basis. That child needs to feel safe, and it's not in the classroom, but we haven't got anywhere for them to go. What do we do?
Okay, so in the context, we recognise that response to threat, real or perceived, as we've been saying so far, is to have a response, a dysregulated response, which may include fight, flight, freezing, actually becoming disassociated or frozen, or just very quiet and shut down, and or a complete sort of flop where you might faint. Adolescent girls, I've worked with a lot of adolescent girls that faint a lot, not necessarily because there's any other issue, but it's traumatically almost too much for them. When I think about what you can actually do, just wanted to say that we recognize it's a response. Okay, so it's a response born out of I feel unsafe. So it's a response to threat that we see that. There are those children that will run. So if we just come down to the flight, and there's a sort of we can differentiate the flight types, if you like, to the ones where I'm off and I'm not looking back to see if there's an adult following me. And I will scale the fence and I will get home to where my mum is and I'm a bit worried she's not safe. I'm just adding that on the end. But there's that. I am really frightened and I need to go back. And there's the other flight, which does tend to irritate people a little bit more, perhaps, where the child runs off and then is I'm just checking you're following. I'll just slow down a little bit because they haven't, and then it's fun to speed up a little bit more again. And so then we've got that kind of game going on, which is about something else, really. It's about power and control. So that one isn't really the flight response that I'm talking about, where the child doesn't feel safe. The other one needs dealing with, if that's the one you're talking about, slightly differently, I would say. But if a child's really responding to what they perceive as threat, we need to, and I'm wondering if it's more of a staffing issue. Do you know what I mean? That we haven't got somebody to go, because that's what we would need to do. We do need to have a body to go, and if you don't have one to go, then you're going to try and do that in the classroom. Well, sometimes in early years they put up little tents, make safe corners, home corners, areas where there are cushions. I was in a school just this morning doing an observation in an early years setting, and they'd got a space right by the window where a child who didn't feel safe often was led and helped and supported to go, and you can sit there with the books, or something he liked. Duplo was there, something he liked to do for a little while, just to have a bit of downtime away from the others and away from the other spaces in the classroom. And I think most teachers and TAs in schools use spaces, safe. I mean, I don't really like the term safe spaces because it makes it sound as though the rest of the spaces aren't safe. But, sort of breakout areas and little spaces that they can find. I think that having something from home and maybe creating a little shoebox where there are a couple of things that connect them to home, and also a couple of things that they really like in school, and having that available, sort of not all the time, but available on if you're feeling like you need a little bit of time where you've got to be regulated or supported to feel safer, where they can share with you something they brought in. That's more early years, or maybe middle school, sort of 3, 4, 5. I think there are other ways we can support them before they've got to the point of flight, which is really what we need to start thinking about more, I suppose. And those are the ways in which children can communicate or indicate they're beginning to become dysregulated or they're beginning to struggle. So you can have visual cards, communication cards that just sort of say, I'm struggling, not I'm struggling in big letters, but, just, maybe they have some other way of indicating to the kindly adults in the classroom that, it's getting a bit tough here, and we can step in and pick up relationally with them. I think, that happens a lot, and I see it working really effectively in classrooms. So I think it really is about, perhaps it is, I mentioned earlier on about using the language of safety quite a lot around that child, and being able to let them know that you're in charge of safety and that you keep things safe for them. I mean, it's not forever, I suppose, which is a bit of a sort of reminds me of my grandmother would say something like that. It was a bit like not put up with it, but she'd say it's not forever. You kind of deal with something, you keep repeatedly making it safe for that child, and the likelihood of them responding in that way will diminish. So I think it's a process. They've arrived at where they've arrived at that response through experience and over time. And it takes some time for that to change. And we need to be prepared to stick with a response, a really safe and consistent response, and not do something for a week and say, oh, well, I tried that, it didn't work. But really to stick with something that is very predictable and consistent for the child, so that they know that we are predictable, safe, consistent people. And I think that helps them not trigger in the first place to want to, or not want to, but to experience the flight response.
Lovely, thank you, Jan. Abby, anything or?
Yeah, I agree with Jan. I think it's all about identifying what we can do before that happens. Obviously, you don't want anyone leaving the room, but on the flip side, I had an interesting discussion with a colleague the other day about a child who was choosing to leave the room. And obviously, I don't know about this child, whoever this person is talking about for this question, but actually what they were doing was a kind of form of regulation, and they were recognizing that it was too much in the classroom, and I'm going to take myself out of it. So maybe when you flip it and try to reframe it and think, is this child dysregulated? Are they just running away? Have they had enough? Or are they trying to tell you this is too much for me and I need something else? I'm trying to manage this myself by leaving, and what other things could be put in place? I think it's just a good way maybe to reframe a situation sometimes, try and come at it at a different angle.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, it's always difficult if a child does reach that stage of the regulation or dysregulation where they need to leave a classroom and a teacher has that choice to make. That's where we would always go back to a plan to think about what the adults around should do.
I also think, sorry, just another point about the things that we do as a whole class, the things that we provide for children. I mean, most children, I think, at some point in their lives or in their family lives or in their friendship groups are going to experience other people who are going to dysregulate or feel that they have mental health issues, or they're going to feel dysregulated, or they're going to be struggling. And so I think there's a validity in all children anyway need to learn to build a stress regulation system. We all need to have a stress regulation system to cope day by day. And so there's validity in teaching the whole class mindfulness practice, visualization, those sorts of things. And I've got a couple of books that I use and recommend quite a lot, and Sonia will be familiar. I can't really show it on this funny screen, but there's one that's called Sitting Still Like a Frog, which is lovely. A blue day for kids, lots of animals with different emotional expressions. My Many Coloured Days, Dr. Seuss. But there's a lot out there where we can, we need to have some time where children actually do learn things like taking their own pulse and then noticing what their resting heart rate is, and then having some exercise and trying out different things that help to bring it back into regular states again. Is it the breathing activity that we did? Was it the blowing bubbles? Was it the lying down and visualizing you were on the beach? Which one? And it becoming normalized that we would need practices that are very common to help us learn to regulate. And I think that's, a whole class thing, and that would help any one child who was struggling as well.
Absolutely, and that brings in again that character policy that right from the beginning. What we should notice over time at Alumnus is that the main student body, as they become sort of more able to analyze their character and choose the things which suits them best in the learning mood that they're in, or the tasks that they've got, make more increasingly accurate choices in how to manage their behavior. So the outliers of the children who can do that, you can spend more time contemplating their need, I suppose, because the main body of children would understand what they need to do in order to cope with it. And I suppose it should be said at this point, there will always be outliers of some extreme behavior, and you really do need to probably get some specialist advice and help with dealing with things that happen outside of the realms of what we would just try to pretend what is normal. Lovely, Jen. That's fantastic. That just one of the other questions off the list. The next question was perhaps the most popular, and Abby, I'm going to let you talk to this one first, because this is a question from a teacher who said, sometimes I find a pupil's dysregulation triggering for myself, especially anxiety around how to help, how to keep the child safe, myself safe, and the others around me. Please, can you provide strategies that make me feel more empowered to support children and other staff members when this happens?
Yeah, I remember reading this one, and actually, I don't know if the person's in this room, but I thought it was an admirable question and very honest and open to say that. You won't be the only person that feels like that. I know when I was a teacher, I didn't feel like that, and you can feel guilt saying, "Oh, there's some children that trigger me or evoke a response in me," and it's really important to sit with that and recognize why that is, based on our own experiences. And I was at the designated teacher conference, if anyone was there the other day, and the presenter was talking about a teacher who spent the first 10 minutes at the end of every day with a cup of tea to reflect on the day and what had happened, what had gone well, what can be changed, because teachers are just so busy, extremely busy, and to stop and reflect and to think about ourselves, the things that affect us, it can be really hard to do. And if you can afford to give yourself that time, I can't give you the strategies, I'm afraid. I don't know who you are or what triggers you, but just to reflect on your own practice, I think is so powerful. And if you can build that into your day, it's something that I would recommend to everyone.
I agree with that. I think that I was mentioning earlier about the self-awareness that question conveys is very, very important for us all, really. Is the idea that we're supposed to be able to get all suited and booted and go to work and manage a wide range of need with often very challenging and highly charged situations and young people dysregulating that we care about, or that we may well be judged about at the drop of a hat. Is a really intense experience to go through daily. And it feels like a lot of responsibility. But the deepening of our self-awareness, knowing what's going to hook her in, and a hook is a behavior that triggers a defensive response. And so noticing that we too have defensive responses, and that we have got strategies, and some of them are a bit unhelpful, some of our strategies. And sometimes we might even dysregulate or feel like leaving the classroom. Heaven forbid. But, but identifying that, and I think that when you've got a really emotionally healthy staff room in a school, where it is a place where you go and somebody is going to probably be there and is there to check in with you, or at the end of the day somebody has come round, somebody in not necessarily a senior position, but hopefully there is that connectedness throughout the staff, checking in, recognizing how you're feeling, doing things together as a staff. And although we are very, very, very busy people, being able to still do something together to build those connections and those bonds where you've got the other care and backing of the team you work within is really, really important when you're in the face of a lot of difficulty. And if and I just think it's too easy for me to look at that question and think, well, you're being triggered. Okay, just remain calm. But actually, it's not always a case of just remain calm. I mean, that's the ideal, because we want to remain calm in the face of dysregulation. That's the message that we want to convey to children, is that I can manage you at your worst. And then the child can go, oh, okay, then they can manage me. I'm not that bad. Or I'm manageable instead of I'm unmanageable. So if our ultimate goal is to be calm, then maybe we do have, a bit of mindfulness at the end of the day with a cup of tea. Maybe we do have some sort of interaction with one another that shares how you're doing or any strategies you're using at the moment. And it's about looking after one another. And there are some really good, because it's become much more of a topical issue, rightly so, is about health and well-being for staff in schools. And there's a lot out there on that subject now.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I've seen the staff room chat with a colleague go one of two ways. One is the spiral down where we join in and everything takes us on a lot lower trajectory. And the other one is when a member of staff listens, reflects, and then points us back to the place where we can, re-engage on another day. Because doesn't matter which teacher you are, that when their children walk into school the next day, regardless of what's happened the day before, they'll go, hi miss, hi sir, isn't it wonderful? And you stand there going, I still haven't got over yesterday.
Yeah, I've had a sleepless night over you. Yeah.
So that intervention by that member of staff in that staff room is so important, that we go back to a reflective point where we can then rebuild, rather than sort of lament that this is never going to make a difference. Because the words that you said, that repeated intervention, that repeated, consistent approach, so the child gets used to it and gets used to that consistent thing happening, so it becomes something that they can rely on, is so important. The final question before we finish was really quite an interesting one. I'm not quite sure where this person gets their evidence from, because I haven't seen it, but I'm not doubting it. It says there's growing evidence that very young children who spend increasingly long periods on phones or iPads are suffering from greater emotional dysregulation and delayed speech. We see children entering preschool provision at age 2 who can use iPads competently but are not yet talking. What are the thoughts on this, and what advice would you give to parents? Because parents is the thing that we've not actually, or the body that we've not actually talked about yet, and that's for teachers, the untapped issue of a child coming in through the door dysregulated before you can even do anything, because just the act of moving from one place to another. Anyway, the overstimulation from iPads and things, is that something that's sparked up in any of your areas?
I think, sorry, Abby, I don't know.
No,
I think
go
for
on.
me, I mean, I don't question much that tech is having an impact on development. Some of it's positive and some of it's not. I think the bigger question for me from this question is, how do we as school staff build relationships with parents that mean we can have conversations with them that are effective about tricky things, about things that they do or don't do at home, or the boundaries they do or don't set at home? How do we become people that they trust instead of people they despise? How do we have that kind of capacity in the way that we interact with them? And I think that that's something that should be our priority, actually, because children are best known by their families, whatever might be happening or not happening, and they are a massive source for us. And building bridges and links between home and school, for me, is really, really important. And for many years, I used to run an induction program at reception, when children would come into school and all parents would come. And every year they would come for a 6-week block of family workshops. And a lot of things, it wasn't just how to help your child with reading. It was about, what's happening with your child's brain development? What's happening in terms of when they communicate this through behavior? How do you feel when you set boundaries for your child? And those early relationships, because those parents that stand outside in the playground, some of them stand together in groups, some of them stand on the periphery, some of them won't leave the car. So they are going to have a very long relationship over a very long period of time with each other, just as their children are coming to the same school. And we need to foster and support them with us, to let them know, to let them build a community that's going to support one another throughout that long relationship, and also with us being able to contribute to the thoughts around whether their child should have an iPad just before bed or spend all weekend on it, or whatever else might or not be happening. But they're not going to listen to us. They're not going to be open to our support and discussion unless we build the relationships from the very beginning.
That's excellent advice, Jan. Thank you.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
I
Sorry,
agree.
Abby.
Yeah. No, I was
Yeah.
just going to say I agree, but I did have one website if it's useful for people, for this person who's concerned about parents and language, and it's called Speech and Language UK, and it's got a really helpful overview of children's language, where they should be, but in parent-friendly terms. And rather than focusing on the negative, it focuses on these are really great strategies that can help. I think that's more useful, often trying to focus on these. It's not everything you're doing wrong. These are extra things that could possibly be helpful. But yeah, I agree with Jan. It is all about the relationship, though, to even have that initial conversation.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, everybody. You can tell by the 0 questions in the chat that you've answered every single behavior related regulation question.
Ask a question.
No, they all want to get away and mark the books.
Oh, bless them.
Have a cup of tea in the 5 seconds that they've got before they have the next meeting. Jan and Abby, thank you very much. It's been very insightful and very informative. Sonia, the work around the schools, just on listening to this conversation, where we can move to next is there, isn't it? And you know, there's some very positive moves we can take from just this conversation, which has been an excellent conversation. So thank you very much. If the panel just want to hang back for a second, everybody else, if you nudge the person beside you and wake them up, and you can leave the conversation. Thank you very much for coming.
Bye all.
Thanks. Bye.